everybody. This is an interesting experience. And I'm happy to be, I think I'm the 8th person who has been sharing our thoughts and our journey since we've been working on Zoom. And my hat off to those of you who went first. But in spite of that, I'm just going to take a moment to connect with each of you, those who are present and those of our community who are not currently on Zoom but are still connected via hearts. It's good to see all of you. I'm going to start by reading a Zen story. 3 monks sat by a lake, deep in meditation. One stood up and said, "I've forgotten my mat." Stepping onto the waters before him, he walked across to the other side, where their small hut stood. When he returned, the second monk said, "I just remembered, I haven't dried my clothes." He too strode calmly across the water to the other bank and returned in a few minutes the same way. The third monk watched them intently. Figuring that this was a test of his own skills, he loudly declared, "So, you think your abilities are better than mine? Watch me," and scurried to the edge of the riverbank. No sooner did he put his foot in than he fell into waist-high water. Unfazed, he waded out and tried again, and again, to no avail. After watching this performance in silence, one of his fellow monks said to the other, "Do you suppose we should tell him where the stepping stones are?" And breaking every rule about Zen stories, which means I'm not supposed to say anything about them, I am going to say something about this because the attitude that I want to bring to our talk today is one of childlike wonder. Because what I see in this story is somebody who was really into ego personality, wanting to prove that he was as holy as the Zen masters by walking on water. And even after failing, not being able to set his pride aside and say, "How did you do that?" A child would have immediately asked, probably with wide-eyed wonder, "How did you do that?" And so in our talk today, I'm approaching this with childlike wonder, setting aside perfection and going with the whole new beginning, happily able to say, I wonder what's next. And I invite you to do that also with whatever's going on in your world today. I get to talk about power. And I'm excited to talk about power because as I was preparing, there's nothing like this pandemic to make me, and I believe I can speak for our world, to feel powerless. And sometimes it's easier to think about what power means by thinking about what it isn't and how powerlessness shows up. And so that's going to be the approach. We've had great speakers, as we always do, already in this month. Nancy led us off by, her talk was so good, I remember thinking, what am I going to talk about? She covered all of the really important aspects of power. And Louise came by and added to that by talking about mothers and nurturing and the importance of bringing that forward into our lives, the power of nurturing love. And then Michael talked a great deal last week and talked about, shared some of his own stories and the power of the throat chakra that's associated with this power of power. And it all comes down to how can we bring our inner power of love that we all have into outward expression through our physical bodies. And that does definitely require childlike wonder. It also requires more than that. It requires us stepping forward with discipline and yet not rigidity. And it requires us to be open accepting, and always compassionate. I do have to take a look here as I kind of move things so that I can read. Today I'm going to talk about the difference between internal power and external power. We're going to take a brief look at some historical examples of how power has been used and abused. And then we're going to take a look at this pandemic as a doorway to a new paradigm, which all of the speakers have been doing really since the outset of the pandemic. I think our community has done a really good job of looking for the silver lining and the opportunities that this pandemic has brought forward to the entire world. So, to define authentic power, I'm using Gary Zukav's definition, which is alignment of the personality with the soul. And he goes on to say that external power, which I call force, is the ability to control and manipulate. So we're looking at authentic power versus force. And now I'm going to just look briefly at ways that our world has historically exerted power, which has almost without fail been force. Because we as spiritual beings have a hunger, a longing to get filled up. Most of us throughout time thought that would be acquired by gaining power, by manipulating other people, by gaining riches, by having property, by having more of whatever we didn't feel like we had. And we still continue to see this happening in our world. It's when we fall into a limited belief that we are only these flesh and blood creatures, feeling the emptiness, the longing, the pain that we have, not knowing there's any other way to get filled up, it makes sense to us that we're going to try to have more of everything. And then when we do get more, we're going to be afraid that we're going to lose it. And we're going to be in such a state of fear that we're going to look at everybody around us in an us versus them approach. And only from that approach are we capable of inflicting harm upon each other. And throughout history, the world's solution to any perceived threat, including real threats, like being killed or being bombed or having our loved ones injured by others, our human response, our personality's response is to strike back. And that continues over and over and over. And as we look at history, it's never stopped. It has never stopped. We have ample amounts of evidence that way no longer works. It can't work. And so here we have this time when the whole world shuts down. At a time when we also have the ability to connect. Unlike any other time in the world, we're connecting right now through Zoom. The whole world is able to connect in a way unlike ever before. We have everything we need to come together as the one whole expression of the divine that we are. And I see this as really the opportunity in this pandemic. And my personal belief, it's only my personal belief, is it's going to hang around, as our lessons do, until we make progress in the way forward authentically. And that means that it will never be solved by blaming us versus them. That's not ever going to bring resolution. It's force, it's not authentic power. So how can we respond? We can respond by tapping into our authentic power. That's what's new about this paradigm, is it's no longer an us and them, it's a we. If we're going to survive in this world, if the world is going to survive, it's going to be we working together. At least enough. It's not going to be, we don't require every human being to perceive this, but those of us who do know that we are divine beings, it is requiring us to step forward and to do our work and to allow the divine to guide us and to respond in a way that only we can do. And it takes far fewer light bulbs in a darkness to illuminate an entire place than it does darkness to try to dissolve itself, because that's not at all possible. So as we move forward, we want to utilize our intention. As we just expressed a few minutes ago, we do believe that we create our reality. And there's intention, and then a new term for me is out-tension, just as a way to think of it as being something different from intention. Intention is the quality of consciousness that we bring to an action. Out-tension is the application of your will to accomplish a physical goal. They're coming from two very different places. Intention comes from our heart and from the divine, compelling us to use our bodies as the vehicle for the divine on earth that they are. That's intention, that's tapping into authentic power. Out-tension is tapping into force or manipulating or trying to attain something outside of ourselves that is not attainable, ever. Throughout history, we have looked for power over others. The dominant culture has always sought control. But within every culture, there have been light bearers, other people quietly doing their work, living their love, and continuing to provide hope to those of us who are born today. Excuse me. In before I jump to today's pandemic, I want to go back to the way that humanity evolves. And I want to go back 100 years, because I believe that what happened approximately 100 years ago is really impacting us today in a positive way. That's when lots of the new thought was being developed. That's when Myrtle and Charles Fillmore were developing the unity principles. It's when Myrtle was able to tap into her healing experience, as Louise talked about in her talk, and yet they were still the minority. And now, today, as I look around the polarity, the polarization that's really pronounced and scary, we're also at a time when we have so many rampant teachers. We have got Joe Dispenza, we've got all the Hay House teachers. There's an acceptance of doing things different, which I believe all help us to tap into the divine within us, at the same time that we're seeing less trust in the outer world. There's definitely decreased participation in churches. There's also decreased trust in the government. Today, in 2019, so this was a year ago, just 17% of Americans said they trusted the federal government to do the right thing. Just about always, or most of the time. That comes from Pew Research. The pandemic appears to be eroding that faith even more, according to the New York Times, which I admit is a more skewed liberal than progressive, but the 17% of all Americans are saying they no longer trust the government in a way that people once did. Now in 2018, just so that we get both sides of politics, actually I don't have it here, but I was reading in 2008, I believe it was like 20% trusted the government. So this is not something brand new, but we no longer trust what's working, what we used to look to for guidance and support. We used to have structures that we counted on, and now all of that is being changed. And so we're being forced to come back to, or not forced, we have an opportunity to come back to the only kind of power that lasts, which is our inner guidance, our inner source of love, the divine. But most people don't know that yet. So we're in this in-between place where what didn't work, what used to work doesn't, and what's going to work is still being birthed. So we're in this period of transition, which is always painful. Two teachers that I've been exploring during this downtime have been Marissa Peer, who is teaching a form of rapid hypnotherapy, and also Joe Dispenza. And it's interesting how during this time, we haven't had our usual distractions. I haven't had my usual distractions. I recognize how much my routine, getting up, exercising, going to work, meditating, all of that really fed me, but it also provided distraction. And then all of a sudden, I no longer had those distractions. And what came forward was my shadow, the part of me, my personality, that I would much rather not have. First thing to go was exercise. I lasted for 2 weeks on my own, and then, boom, it's out the door. And I noticed my self-talk was, oh, geez, Joan, here you go again. How many times do you want to start over? You know what happens. Downward spiral, downward spiral. And that never goes well. So the real opportunity, one of the many opportunities during this time of pandemic, is what's surfacing for you. I do think all of our shadows are coming forward. All of our external ways of filling up the inside that we usually take for granted have been taken away from us. And so there's only us. And what's there? For me, there was certainly joy that I share life with another person. You know, I have always had somebody to talk to. I was never totally alone. But that has its challenges too for those of us who were confined in space with one other person. Because not only then were our shadows coming forward, but the shadows of the person that we live with, from our perspective, was coming forward. And since the external world is a mirror of what's going on inside of us, as our shadow comes forward, the only place that we have power is to bring healing love to that place. And one of the things I've learned working with Joe on the online work that I've been doing with him is that we cannot create a future by being rooted in the past. Whether that be globally, historically, if we want to create a new paradigm, as we're talking about doing, where there's balance, where there's authentic power, where there's compassion, the world that each of us dreams of, we cannot do it from this place and time of our current thoughts, because they're all rooted in the past. So how do we move to the future? We have to tap into the divine, because our current bodies, our current thoughts, are all outgrowths of the past. And so the way that Joe teaches, and I'm just using Joe as one example, but he has got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers, because his work has results. And that's what we're all hungering for. We don't want just talk, we want experiences. How can we grow experientially? And what Joe teaches is, he teaches a form of breathing that enables a person, really it's tapping into our spiritual self using the chakras. He calls them energy centers, but also taps into the field around us, which Lynn McTaggart talks about as well. We can just think of it as our energy body, and that it's contained within our body and expressing through our body. But if we don't go to the gas station of our soul and get filled up, then not only our body gets depleted, but the energy field around us gets depleted, and we feel really solid. And so in this time when we do feel really solid, when life feels heavy, the path forward is to tap into our divinity, to go to the gas station, to get filled up. If that's 2 hours a day right now, sometimes for me it has taken 2 hours a day to get out of the shadow, the mess, the stuff. If we again go back to the image of the lotus, this pandemic is opportunity for us to be the lotus. With our roots in the mud, can we bring loving compassion to the parts of ourselves that are muddy, messy, particles? and open up to the light to get filled up that's all around us. That's where our power lies. And ultimately, as we are compassionate and accepting of ourselves, tapping into that power, we will be able to demonstrate a form of authentic power that the world longs for and that it's ready for and time for. And I'm going to give an example of another Zen story that is one that we can strive for, realizing we may not make it, but we're still striving for it. This is an example of real power to take with us into our week. During the countryside wars, a general swept from town to town, conquering each place with ease. In one particular town, the general discovered that everyone had fled just before his army arrived. Everyone except the Zen master. Curious about what sort of man this was, the general visited the temple himself. Inside, the Zen master remained still and refused to bow or even move out of the general's way. When it was clear the Zen master would not defer to the general's power, he became furious. "Fool," he shouted as he drew his weapon. "Don't you see you are standing before a man who would run you through without blinking an eye?" The Zen master responded with absolute calm. "And don't you see that you are standing before a man who could be run through without blinking an eye?" Humbled by the Zen master's resolve, the general regrouped his forces and returned from where they had come. And so now I just invite you to take that into your heart and close your eyes. We're going to do just a short meditation as we carve out a few moments to tap into the vibrant power, the most powerful force in all the universe of love. And so I invite you to just take a slow, deep breath in through your nose and out. Notice we're not afraid of running out of oxygen. We know we live in a world of abundance, and we allow the breath to fill us. Once again, slow, deep breath. We welcome all parts of ourselves. We welcome the human part of us that feels fear for loved ones who are ill. We welcome the fear of what might happen in the world with all of this polarity. We welcome the part of us that wants to walk on the water without asking to be shown the way. We're all little children. And there's a life force within us that adores us. And we ask for that part of ourselves, which is the same within each of us. We ask for that part of ourselves to help us see others with that equal depth of compassion, that we can see beyond our differences to that which unites us. We ask to be filled with love. We ask for the ability to dance in response to the impulses our heart guides us to, for we are people of action. But action from the quiet. This is what we seek. This is what is real. This is what is present. We are one. We are love, and this is an opportunity unlike any other. May you be gentle with yourself and each other as we just take the next step. So just come back to the room that you're in. Allow your heart to be light. Letting go of everything that has come before. May you know yourself for the life force and the loving being you are.